Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Carol Carter, and I'm from Global Minded. I'm here with Lisa Wyckoff today, and we are delighted that JC Whorton, who runs our rural equity team, has put together this really tremendous week for all of you. If some of you have not heard of Global Minded, I'll share a little bit about our work. We are dedicated to creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented, first gen to college, rural populations, however you can define diversity, into the education, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline. So that's what we stand for. We accomplish these goals in a few different ways. One is we have an annual conference every year that has become a virtual event like what we're experiencing now. This week was actually going to be a pre-conference and followed by some sessions during our conference. So we have a YouTube channel. This will be recorded and will be featured on our YouTube channel, so anybody can watch it. You can share it with some of your folks who may not have been able to make it live today. And we have sessions every day this week. So if you all are interested, you can check on our website for the details of the other sessions. And a couple of other things, we do programs for first-gen leaders, and we work with them to connect them to role models, mentors, internships, and jobs. And we do a leadership program for them on all of the hidden curriculum that they need to not only complete college, but get into what we call promotion pathway jobs. We also do Inclusive Leader Awards every year across 14 different sectors. And we feel strongly that until the diversity and inclusion leaders are as known as the sports stars and the movie stars, we're not going to have the diversity that we hope to see in our C-suite and on boards and running universities. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome our board member, JC Whorton, who is also the author of a book called The Flyover Nation that just came out a couple of months ago. And he's done a really wonderful job of putting this entire week together. And for those of you who have been doing anything virtually, you know what kind of hurdles that entails. So JC, so great to have you here, and thank you so much for such a fantastic week you put together.
Thank you, Carol. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today as we begin our week session on rural resilience. I'm very honored today to have Lauren and Chantal to begin Global Minded's Rural Resilience Week and discuss the work that the Western Governors Association and the Colorado Department of Local Affairs are doing to level the playing field between the urban and the rural areas. Chantal Unfug is the Director of the Division of Local Government in the Department of Local Affairs and a former Global Minded board member. Lauren DeNinno is a senior policy advisor at the Western Governors Association. Both Lauren and Chantal were instrumental in the Western Governors Association's year-long project, Reimagining the Rural West Initiative. COVID-19 is a massive turning point in history that is completely rebooting society. Financially, it is clearly the most expensive catastrophe in history. Socially, it will take years for many people to overcome contact phobia, such as shaking hands or hugging. It will forever change large urban centers. Forever seems like a long time, but what are some of the near-term changes we can expect for rural and nearby micro-urban areas? Will rural and micro-urban areas benefit from reverse migration from the mega-urban centers? It already has. The geography of rural America has contributed to gaps in college access and attainment. Rural counties cover 97% of the U.S. land area, but are home to just 14% of the country's college campuses. As of 2018, just 42% of learners who attended a rural high school completed college within 6 years after high school graduation. More than 21 million adults living in rural counties do not have a college degree. According to the Federal Communications Commission, a quarter of rural citizens, a total of 14.5 million people, lack access to broadband internet, while Microsoft estimates that number to be much higher, in some cases twice as much. Whatever the number is, and whether the reason is lack of access, affordability, or reliability, or access to broadband internet, it severely limits or eliminates the ability to study or work online. It is a general consensus that broadband should be a basic utility necessity, such as electricity, water, or sewage. As many as 4 million small businesses may be lost entirely in 2020. As a matter of fact, 1.5 million have already closed so far. Survivors are faced with decisions as to whether to adapt, pivot, or change the course altogether. According to the Center on Rural Innovation, rural communities are also much more dependent than rural areas on certain industries that are some of the highest risk of demand disruption from COVID or the inability to use work from remote. It has been said that innovation and ingenuity shine brightest on the darkest days, and in every crisis, there is opportunity. So join me in welcoming Lauren and Chantal, and let's explore the various ways to find opportunity in this crisis and create a new rural resilience.
Thank you.
Let's see, Lauren, were you going, or Chantal, are you up?
I'll go first.
Okay, Lauren.
Thank you, JC. And thank you so much, Carol, for organizing this and having us on today. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about the work that WGA has done in the past year on the Reimagining the Rural West initiative. But first, for some background for everybody, in case you're not familiar with us, WGA represents the governors of the 22 westernmost states and territories, and we do policy development and advocacy on behalf of those governors. So we work with members of their staff to identify and advocate for policies that they have voted on, and we get together with our governors, or we used to, twice a year as well to work on those processes. So every year WGA has a chair, and the chair chooses an initiative that we spend the bulk of the year on, and we primarily serve as a convener to have really big tent conversations in the West and drive towards developing policy, bipartisan policy, on behalf of our governors. So in 2019, 2020, our chair was Governor Doug Burgum of North Dakota, and he selected Reimagining the Rural West as his chairman's initiative. And so the initiative, it really came about from a place of optimism about the rural West and looking at the landscape of our states and realizing that there's a lot of opportunity for governors and for the federal government as well to better support rural communities as they adapt to the changes in technology and in the economy that have been going on for the last several decades and show no signs of stopping. So the goals were really broad, and it was a big conversation for the last year that touched on a ton of different issues. I think if you guys are all familiar with rural development, you'll recognize that there's almost no issue that isn't a rural issue, particularly in the West, where our geography means that many of our rural communities are really isolated, remote, have very low population densities. So there's a lot of challenges, but a lot of good things going on as well in rural communities. So especially last year in July 2019, when we kicked off, it was an optimistic time, I would say. We were having a historic boom in the economy. Employment was really high across the West. And it seemed like there was a lot of interest in rural communities, and making sure, particularly from our governors, many of them were prioritizing workforce development and education in their rural communities to ensure that that prosperity was spread across their states and not just concentrated in their main cities. So I think obviously there's a different situation facing us now because of COVID-19, and there's a lot to be more concerned about now. And I think we can all agree that the pandemic has sort of highlighted and exacerbated some of the challenges that rural communities have. But I'm hopeful that it will also give new urgency to figuring out solutions and figuring out how to make sure that opportunity is spread across all the regions of the West. So I'm going to hopefully give a little bit of context for some of the rural challenges that are being faced in the Western United States, and it's certainly the case across the whole U.S. as well. And then discuss kind of the recommendations and findings that came out of the initiative. And I'm going to go ahead and send a link right now for our report, which was published last month. And that includes a lot more detail and information on the specific recommendations that we made. And you can also find the links to some more of the content that I'm going to talk about as I go through this. So let me just make sure that I'm on track to make sure I don't miss anything important. So some of the key goals from the Reimagining the Rural West initiative were focused at the federal level because that's the kind of policy that WGA does. And the federal relationship to the states in terms of economic development and rural development is really essential because the federal government controls a lot of the resources that go towards both economic development and rural infrastructure, and they always have. So, most of the infrastructure in the United States was funded by the federal government at different points in the past century. And the same is true for rural communities, but they were often not the first priority when we were undertaking some of those big nation building projects. And so many rural communities today still have less of that essential infrastructure or have never had it. So there's still places in the United States that don't have electricity. There's a ton of people in the United States who don't have running water or wastewater infrastructure that they have access to in their homes. And of course, broadband is now what most people think of when they think about these divides between the infrastructure and quality of life in rural and urban areas. And broadband is a huge, huge issue still. So recommending changes to the federal policies that dictate where that money is spent and how we're investing in development was one of the key goals. Another was to just share best practices and success stories from across WGA states so that we're not reinventing the wheel every time that a governor or a local government decides to undertake a project to solve one of these challenges. And then the last one was to promote positive stories to help shift the narrative about rural communities. I think we're all kind of used to hearing national media stories that paint a picture of rural decline. We talk about brain drain a lot and people moving away from these rural communities and businesses closing and manufacturers or coal mines, for example, closing. And it just creates this idea that there's nothing good really happening in the rural areas of the country. And that could not be further from the truth. I think that there's so much positive going on in rural communities, particularly in the Western region. And there's a lot of new opportunity that's being opened up every day, in part thanks to technology, in part thanks to changing consumer preferences. There's tons of communities in the rural West that are growing in population and have, economies that are taking advantage of some of the new opportunities that are available today, particularly in tourism and recreation, but all kinds of things across the spectrum. And so we really wanted to talk about those places and give them a voice to share what they need and how they're developing and what they recommend for others to emulate. So, like I said, with the onset of COVID-19, it really changed kind of the big themes and thrust of what we were talking about. But I would also say that it's really reinforced the need for this kind of big conversation about how we can do rural development better. We've already seen with some of the aid that's come out of Congress from the CARES Act that because of the structural differences in rural and urban settings, it's really hard for rural communities, rural businesses, rural individuals to access those resources in a timely fashion. So there's a risk that as we go through this recovery, that it's going to deepen some of the inequity between rural and urban areas. And so it's really important to understand the structural issues that rural communities are facing and figure out how to bridge them so that they're on a level playing field as we work through this crisis. So like I said, there's such a wide and vast number of issues that you could fold into rural development. So to go about having this initiative, we started with surveys where we asked people to help identify what the priorities and challenges are in their rural communities. And then we started having workshops and webinars where we tackled some of those discrete issues and tried to figure out what some of the overlying themes are for how policymakers can better serve rural communities. So we had 4 workshops in Fargo, North Dakota, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Post Falls, Idaho, and then the 4th was intended to be in rural Oregon, and unfortunately we had to switch that one to a virtual workshop. All of the workshops are available to watch on our website, westgov.org, and I encourage you to take a look. You can watch each of the panels. They're all broken out, and they cover just a huge range of topics. And each of the workshops was attended by about 100 people, and they represented a pretty diverse array of interests. So we had lots of local economic development organizations, local elected leaders, the state agencies that deal with rural development, from housing to transportation to social services. We also had a lot of attendees from community colleges, universities, extension, and then the private sector was also a huge participant in this. And there's, I think, a ton of interest in the private sector in making sure that rural communities have the infrastructure that they need, since that's where their customers are, that's where their businesses are located, their suppliers are located. So it was a really big tent conversation, and we got a ton of people to participate in person, as well as in webinars, which you can also watch on our website, westgov.org. And those covered some more specific issues and challenges, particularly broadband. We had a 4-part series on broadband. And then starting in March, we did a handful of webinars that were focused specifically on the impacts of COVID-19 on rural communities and how they could respond and recover. So the result of all of that information gathering, all those discussions, was the findings and recommendations in the report, which are organized into 3 pillars. And the pillars are sort of the basics for the foundation for a healthy and vibrant and prosperous community. And they are opportunity, connectivity, and community. And I'll go through each of them with just an overview right now, and then we can talk more about the specific recommendations if people have questions. So for opportunity, what we're really talking about is economic opportunity. And I think for Global Minded, this is one of the key issues. So many rural economies are dependent on a single industry or a single company and have less of a resilient economic base. And so they're vulnerable to global disruptions like this pandemic, or to micro disruptions like a wildfire or the closure of a coal mine. So for many rural communities, diversification is the goal. And in the past, economic development has really focused on attracting new employers. But what we found in the initiative is that entrepreneurship and building small businesses in your community from the ground up is sort of where the trends are going, and a more successful strategy for a lot of rural communities. And a big part of that is also connecting young people to good opportunities in their communities, which sometimes is entrepreneurship, or sometimes it's more traditional jobs. But it can be a bigger challenge to achieve workforce development goals in rural communities because there are fewer educational providers and fewer employers to work with. But there is a ton of opportunity in rural communities, and updating and keeping updated the labor statistics that you're using and how you're training those students, and making sure that they are getting connected to people in their communities that can mentor them and show them what the opportunities are is really, really crucial. Connectivity is huge, and it's a foundation for pretty much every recommendation that we had. I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's pretty wonky stuff, but I think we all recognize that businesses, students, local governments, they all need quality broadband in order to be effective. And there's a huge discrepancy between where broadband dollars are going and where in the situation on the ground. So a lot of what we talked about was getting accurate data to show the quality of broadband in rural places, where people actually have it, and where it's good enough to support the uses that people expect today, including things like telehealth. So check out the report if you want more specific recommendations related to connectivity. But then I'll move on to community. And this, I think, is one of the most important sections of the report and of our recommendations. The rural West is not a monolith. There's really different kinds of communities. There's agricultural communities, there's tourism communities. There's places that have historically had a lot of manufacturing, and maybe that's changing now, but they all have different challenges and different priorities based on what their historic roots are and what the people there want today. So with community, what we're really talking about is quality of life and livability. And so for some communities, it's going to be things like really basic necessities like access to healthcare, food security, running water or sewage treatment. While for others, it's going to be like growth challenges like affordable housing, or not having a vibrant arts and culture scene, or not having enough childcare. So every community has different issues and different priorities, but what's really critical in the way to solve for those challenges in most cases is going to be ensuring that there are rural leaders and the local capacity for people to create a vision for what the future of their community is going to look like, and then go out and capture the resources that are already available to be able to implement that vision. So capacity building and fostering rural leaders, I think if I had to choose the most important recommendation, that's what I would highlight. And the report has a lot of recommendations for how governors are doing this in their states and how we could do it better at the federal level. But building that capacity in rural communities is crucial. People in rural communities have so many things on their plate already. It takes longer to just do regular stuff like go to the grocery store. That might be a 40-minute trip for someone in a rural community. Or they might be working more than one job, or they're already volunteering on 3 different boards. So you have to be able to provide services and assistance to rural communities in a way that's efficient for them. And right now, it's sometimes harder for rural communities to access the resources they need than it is for their counterparts in urban areas. And they don't have this paid staff whose job it is just to write grants, or they don't have, an architect or an engineer on staff that can draw up plans for the project that they want to win funding for. So there's a lot that can be done, like I said, both at the federal level and at the state level, to try to build capacity, find more efficiencies, and make it easier for these rural communities to get the resources that they need. I think I'm going to pause there and turn it over to Chantal, because that is really what she's all about.
Thanks, Lauren. It's been really fun working with Lauren these last few years on this work, and we were so proud that the governor, the chairman, chose Reimagining the Rural West, because it is something that we work on all the time. And JC and Carol, thank you so much for inviting both of us, Lauren and I, on for this panel. It's so cool looking at the names of the people. What a great idea to have everybody type in where they're from and what they do. God, we have people from New Mexico and Alaska and Florida. And this is just awesome. It's one of the, I think, silver linings of COVID and looking at the rural space, because I am seeing more people in the space of these last 3 months than I ever have, and been able to tap into this expertise, this global expertise, Carol, that you have really created to learn from each other. It's just really wonderful. So thank you. So as JC said, my name is Chantal. I'm the head of the Division of Local Government within a state department here in Colorado called the Department of Local Affairs. I've been really lucky in my career to work for 3 Colorado governors, 3 Denver mayors, and 3 rural county commissioners. So it's the 3X, not the 10X, but the 3X viewpoint. And I've been able to work, as I said, in a large metropolitan city and a smaller rural county, which is Mesa County over on the western slope of Colorado, which is borders Utah. And so I've been able to really see both. And one of the things I also really appreciate with JC and how you laid out this session is that rural really is about diversity. And it's diversity of thought and experience and values that are very different from the urban centers. And quite often in our work, we see nonprofits or schools looking at a pilot in Denver and then thinking that they can just roll it out statewide and without taking the time to really learn about communities and what the needs are and what the unique challenges are, like Lauren mentioned. It's not just one size fits all in rural communities. And so that's what I'm really passionate about. The Department of Local Affairs is a unique department across the country. So in Colorado, we're really lucky. And I recommend after this, if anybody wants to find out how this was done in Colorado, please just reach out to me. But 50 years ago, when Colorado was going through a huge population boom, really when all the 60s and 70s, all the hippies wanted to live in the West and everybody came out here from California driving their VW buses and wanted to settle here. Colorado was going through this huge population boom and most of the dollars started really focusing on transportation in and around Denver. The rural communities stepped up and collaborated to come to the state to ask for their own department, which I think is really fascinating. So they wanted to have a central place for information for rural Colorado and local governments. They wanted to have funding, which I'll talk about, and they wanted to have an advocacy agency within the state government. So it was really amazing leaders with the forethought of knowing that if they didn't step on it, everything would be focused into the front range of around Denver and people would be left behind. So over 50 years, DOLA has been that voice at the Capitol for the governor and for the General Assembly, fighting for rural communities. My team, so the department itself has 4 divisions. My team is the Division of Local Government, and by its name, you can probably guess what we do. And I know that there's a lot of people on this call who work with us very closely, so thank you for joining. And in the Q&A, please step in because really our work is to support these communities' values and priorities. And so I saw, for instance, Wendell from Chaffee County is on, and if he'd like to say something later, that would be great. So what's really exciting about rural communities and challenging and concerning, just like Lauren said, there's this mix. There has been a lot of population decline. So something that we can talk about in the Q&A discussion is what's happening right now because of COVID and higher uses of technology. We're starting to see another reverse migration back into rural communities. And we have communities that are starting to have a challenge with that kind of growth. So that'll be interesting because it is, Lauren, like you said, kind of the opposite of the scene or the story we're told. The other thing I want to mention is here in Colorado, Governor Polis, who has been in office now about 1.5 years, he's the first governor here to create a rural cabinet. And that's something that's really important because when you are working in rural communities from a state perspective, every department works in rural communities in their own ways. And one of our jobs as a state government is to make it as streamlined and as seamless as possible. So for those communities, they're not having to shop us to get the information. And that is so hard to do, but I want you to know that we're really trying. But that's something that other people and other organizations in other states can do as well, is to centralize some of that conversation. But so the rural cabinet has wildly important goals. They have cross-sector cabinet working groups working for rural communities. And I think that this is something that sets Colorado a little bit on the forefront. And Lauren can come back to that as well because she's really more the expert of multiple states. But but we're able to bring that to the table. So in the Division of Local Government, just to talk a little bit about the organization, as I said, we do have funding, and that was part of the special sauce when we were created, was to ensure that there was money to sort of put our money where our mouth is in supporting communities. So for example, Lauren mentioned the connectivity is a critical asset that we've all been talking about. We've set aside $50 million to provide to local governments to ensure that there's rural broadband. And that's a great example of how lots of stakeholders can come together to support rural communities. Like Lauren, you said, everybody's wearing different hats, but you have to be able to have the capacity and the funding and the resources to be able to get these things done. So $50 million for rural broadband, and we are really doing well. We've been focusing on it for 5 years, and it's been a real challenge. And I think Colorado's doing pretty well with it. We also have about 60, depending on the revenue sources, but between 60 and $100 million that goes into rural critical infrastructure. It could be for roads, it could be for public safety facilities, it could be town halls. Local governments can apply to create programs to partner with nonprofits. They can be for economic development purposes. And that's something that isn't unique nationally or globally. These dollars come from our severance funds, which are the extraction taxes on the extraction industries. So predominantly here in Colorado, it's oil and gas, but we also do have coal mining, and we have some other mining such as gold and molybdenum. So as you know, in some countries, they have multi-billion-dollar trust funds for this purpose. We have Wyoming, we have Montana, we have Washington State that have sources of funds like this. Every state organizes it very differently. Here in Colorado, we do grant cycles 3 times a year, and we try to get that money out as fast as possible. Again, going back to what I said about supporting local priorities, it really is what we believe in. So we don't have a parameter outside of our statute that says what we can grant this money for, because we really believe that the local governments and the community process should come to us and say, this is our priority for the year, and we're able to support them with that. We have a couple other programs I wanted to mention because they do really specifically touch economic development and workforce development, but we started a program called the 4R program, and I like the visual of a brand, a rural brand, 4R, so it's rural response, recovery, and resilience. And that was laid the groundwork for a new office that just started called the Just Transitions Office. And this is something that's happening around the country, but this is ensuring that people aren't left behind in rural communities when their economies are really overly dependent on coal. We believe in Colorado that this in-depth work with communities impacted by the transitions of the coal economy can really be the building blocks for future economies. And if we look at more diversity in that voice at the table, where are we going? Reimagining the rural West. You have to consider that these rural economies are based predominantly on natural resources and extraction economies. And so that we foresee really coming to fruition in this next year. We also have a program called the Rural Economic Development Initiative, where we are trying to bring together the collaboration between local governments and the economic development sector. So a lot of these grants go towards building critical infrastructure to a business park, for example, or an increased size of a wastewater treatment plant because there's a new business park that's being developed, something like that. So our effort to try to bring people together, as we know in rural communities, you have to get everybody at the same table to have these conversations. So I think when we talk about the building blocks, when I think about urban and rural, and often what we call the divide between urban and rural, there is often a misunderstanding of what is needed at the local level. I do believe that the building blocks are the same wherever you go, whether you work for the World Bank and you're working in Bangladesh, or you are working cross-sector across states, or you're working in a specific community here in Colorado. You have the asset mapping. What are the assets that are that are successful for you? What are the things you can leverage? Who are the partners you have at the table? What are your values? What is your strategic plan? And you start building from there. Hopefully in other states, we have great partnerships like we have here in Colorado with teams of people that are trying to make that happen. Also, I want to just mention a couple things that we've learned. So lessons learned from our perspective. One thing is if you move too fast in a rural community, you can kind of see some pushback. So really to take that step back and think about what you're doing and building those partnerships and ensuring that really diverse voices are at the table, then you'll have a stronger outcome. We did do a study with our Office of Economic Development about 3 years ago that posed the question, what makes a rural community successful and what does that even mean? And we brought the CU School of Business in with our state demographer here in Colorado to look at that. And this isn't going to be any surprise to any of you, but it really came down to leadership. So we started really looking at how are leaders developed in rural communities when so many people wear the same hats? How do you bring in new voices? How do you bring in new ages and younger people to the table to start developing that future workforce and that future leadership table? And so that's something that we and I think a lot of organizations just like Global Minded are really trying hard to build that pipeline. But so we did find that in a pretty extensive study that actually what it came down to. I think we know that intuitively, but there it was in writing. The other thing is also building the trust. Most of the work we do in DOLA, we like to be in our cars. We are definitely road warriors. I did go to a conference a couple years ago with community development institutions and finance institutions, CDFIs. And it was we went to a panel on rural and it was very interesting. Folks were grappling with how do they provide great customer service and look for these deals that they could support when they had to drive for 3 or 4 hours to get somewhere. And I had to raise my hand and say, well, that's nothing. You obviously aren't from the West because we'll be in a car for 8 hours to get to a meeting. But so again, the Zoom has been really nice to be able to see people and talk with people. But we do really like to build trust with the face-to-face and the handshake and really being there for our communities so they know that we're not going to divorce them. We're there through thick and thin and we're never going to walk away. And that's what's really important to know that. So they welcome us into their communities, hopefully. Looking to the future, some of the things that we've been working on, we are working on looking at rural resilience hubs. And this is, you could call it, development hubs, you could call it, accelerators, but we're trying to look at if there's some kind of special, I was gonna say special sauce, but something that makes the connection between incubators, accelerators, venture funding, workforce development, economic development, community development, all into the same kind of place and learn from each other. Learn what the workforce needs are and how they connect to the business sector. And so that's something that we're really trying to look at for this next couple of years. Also in terms of funding, in Colorado, we have started something called the Rural Funders Learners Network. This is the first in its country, I understand, where from the philanthropic side, they are coming together to learn more about rural communities. And just like all of us like state agencies, you have foundations that might visit the same community and they're all coming on different days and everybody wants to roll out the red carpet, but it's pretty difficult to take their mind off of their own jobs in order to have these separate meetings. So they're trying to coordinate that as well and be more strategic about how they learn about the needs of rural communities. There's also the Rural Action Network, which is a webinar series. It used to be but the Rural Philanthropy Days here in Colorado is a really successful rural funders collaborative model with communities. And now online, they've launched the Rural Action Network serving that purpose since we're not doing it in person right now. But so I am really hopeful because I think, like Lauren said, we're not really hearing the whole story. And I am seeing there be more focus on rural communities as a whole. I think we all would agree that, the rising tide is what makes us all strong. And I hear that there's a lot of work in, for instance, Virginia, Maine, Kansas, Minnesota, the USDA, the United States Department of Ag Rural Development team is really strong across the country. And I think everybody is really talking about this. So we might be seeing this resurgence of a reverse migration and a real focus, and with funding and resources and capacity into rural areas. I'm going to turn it back over to JC. I do just want to pose a question because I think this is still a real challenge. We see it in Colorado, is getting the voices to the table. So I know when I see local government meetings, I do not see a lot of diversity of age or race or gender out there in Colorado, and maybe Lauren can talk to that in other states. This is the West, so I'd just like to pose that as a potential question. So thanks, JC. I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. First of all, Lauren, do you have any comments from Chantal's remarks there as they related to your study?
Yeah, I think Chantal is right that there's, Colorado is one of the states that has a really good structure in place to do this kind of work and serve as a coordinator, or I think some states call it an integrator, and be a one-stop shop for their rural communities. I think there's a lot of, and certainly DOLA is a unique agency. There's nothing like it in the West, but there are a lot of different models being used in Western states. We worked closely with Oregon. They have a pretty good system up there. There's also, in each of the governor's offices, they oftentimes have someone who's focused on rural issues and can make those connections. And I think that's really, really important. And then in terms of bringing young people to the table, that was a really big focus of Governor Burgum, and one that I wanted to touch on. I'm glad you reminded me about that. There's a lot of really innovative models out there for getting young people engaged in their community's development, and they learn really important job skills through doing that. I mean, we heard about some programs that were just so innovative and making such a big impact on those young people's lives, and they were doing project management. They were picking up the phone and calling businesses in their communities and learning those people skills. They were even learning how grant writing works. And I think that's what I was trying to get at when I was saying there's a lot that young people can do in their communities and want to do. So bringing them to the table and helping them find their voice to kind of shape the future of their community is really powerful, not just to make your community stronger, but to strengthen the young people and give them the skills that they need to be successful as well.
And Lauren, I just want to add, a footnote to that, is that we worked with our 100 first gen student leaders this year, and Every Learner Everywhere funded us to do 90-minute segments with them. So Dr. Nina Mosby-Tyler and I conducted these sessions, and it's amazing how important it is, and especially in multiple crises, which is this unprecedented time that we're in, to simply listen to what these young people are telling us so that we have that knowledge writ large in order to be able to respond. And, in general, there isn't enough of that going on. So maybe there's a way coming out of this event this week that we could do something similar for, rural students in rural America, and really hear firsthand from some of those folks as well. So maybe that's something we can have as something coming out of this.
One of the things that I would like to add to everyone, and wow, Lauren and Chantal, talk about setting this up for the next 4 sessions, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Wow. Thank you. One of the things that I want to throw out that I'm very concerned about that Chantal brought up was the natural resource extraction. In the US, there are 12 million royalty owners in the United States. And historically, they have received probably trillions of dollars over the century. But I think the last year that I had a record 2 years ago, it was billions of dollars that the royalty owners got. Well, that for years has subsidized communities, agriculture. A lot of the farmers, ranchers that I've been aware of in western states and eastern states in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and parts of the Marcellus Shale have received large sums of money which help buy equipment and do upgrades to the agriculture. Well, natural resource extraction also goes real heavy into the state's coffers for education. And most of the land grant colleges in the United States are, especially in the western states, receive a fair amount of tax revenue from natural resource extraction. And my fear with the demand destruction from the COVID, changing technologies to alternative sources of energy, solar, wind, much of that revenue will start decreasing in addition to the pricing scenario that we have on global energy prices. But that has been historically over 100+ years such an important source of revenue for the 12 million royalty owners and for the state governments and especially education. And that is going to create a tsunami of change in state governments. So I think that is something we're all going to have to put on our radar screens and start on all of our councils, committees, governments to plan around, is which I hope it is gradual and not as radical as it was this fall or this spring, but how we deal with transitioning that source of long established revenue out of our budgets. So that is one thought.
Well, yeah, I think that's the silver bullet or $1 million question that everybody's trying to look at. As I mentioned, and Laura mentioned, cultivating basis, just transitions work is something nationally that is trying to wrap those different pieces into this discussion. From our perspective, we're working with local governments because oftentimes, as I said, they are disproportionately dependent on resource activity. And in Colorado, we have a pretty specific property tax and tax structures, which make it challenging to raise taxes here. So some local governments have 70% of their property tax dependent on the single company that's operating there, like a coal mine or a power plant. And so that's a really big deal. So we have been for the last few years really developing fiscal stability tools and templates so local governments can understand the taxation implications. We don't work with any of the royalty owners, so I can't speak to that. But I do know that, that's part of what policymakers across the country are trying to figure out. What are those next jobs? And I know Clark Becker is on the call too, and maybe he can chime in. He's the head of the Rural Workforce Consortium here in Colorado, and has a lot of experience in looking at the rural workforce and dependency pieces around extraction. The other thing I'll just mention, I could probably put it into the chat, but there is a really good organization out of Bozeman, Montana called Headwaters Economics, and they are very skilled and knowledgeable about this topic, and they have put out reports that I know we use in the state, so you can reach out to them as well.
So one of the other things, seeing a chat question, which was very timely because I was getting ready to bring this up. In speaking of natural resources in the West particularly, we can never stress the importance of water in allocation of water resources. As the urban centers grow, there is a lot of competition for water between the outlying agriculture areas and the residential and industrial and government use of water. And in your comment, working to develop water education for students in the community, and the complexity of the Western water laws when you get into junior, senior water rights. Water usage availability in the West is going to be a huge issue from here on out. And I would, I do hope that is on a number of academic agendas.
You know, it's JC, it's sometimes in these kind of conversations, it starts feeling very dire, because when you can start pulling out these sectors that are really under a lot of stress, whether it's water, affordable housing, connectivity, just like Lauren has been talking about, but we'd still have to keep coming back to the hope that we have for the rural areas, because there's innovation, there's dedicated people and passionate people who live there, who can make these communities successful. And what does successful mean? In my mind, it's about sustainability. So do these communities still exist in 20 years or 30 years or 50 years? Can your children come back after college and raise their family and have a business? And can they be successful? And I think we're on the verge of that really happening, especially with more diverse, like I said, voices at the table. Looking at that, I have lots of friends here in Denver who have, much to the chagrin of some communities, are all wanting to move out into the communities. I have friends who just moved to Traverse City after being here 25 years. They're very interested in getting away from the traffic and having a better quality of life. And it's critical that these communities have these harder conversations without getting mired in how hard it is. Just like I put into the chat to respond to that question, the state here passed a law requiring local governments to build water planning into their land use and comprehensive planning. In our grant programs, we also require the assessment of affordability of housing, because here in Colorado specifically, which might be a little different than other states, we are also very tourism related. And the ski resort areas, nobody can buy anything. And so then you pile on a whole other set of issues. But I know that I still really have a lot of hope and a lot of excitement about where this is going, and let's not lose that too.
Mm-hmm.
If I can just pop in on that, I think one of the things that we talked about in the initiative is that economic development, it really isn't just about getting more jobs or better jobs anymore. There's so many people that can move wherever they want with their job, especially now, and we're seeing more and more of this with COVID. So having a great quality of life is going to attract jobs just as much as, you know, the tax incentives of a couple decades ago were going to. It's just it's more diffuse. It's not a single company, but that builds more resilience into your economy as well. And so we talked about economic development dollars going towards things like natural infrastructure, like projects to revitalize riverfronts and projects like that maybe don't fit the traditional definition of economic development, but are things that communities want to spend their money on and will pay returns, because that's what their assets are. Their asset is water. Their asset is outdoor recreation and having a great downtown. So giving communities the power to do what they want with the funds that are available will, I think, solve a lot of problems, not just economic development ones.
Okay, Carol, let's see how much time we have. Do you want to comment, open for questions, or?
Yeah, I think it'd be great if people would like to put their questions in the chat. And we had also asked for anybody who hasn't shared, you know, where you're from. It's pretty interesting to see how many people are at this event from all over the place. So like Chantal said, that's a silver lining of these COVID times. But yes, we'd like to know questions you have for JC and Lauren and Chantal, and also maybe just general things that are on your mind from the chair where you sit, having to do with rural. And I did here this weekend that the White House said, you know, the COVID rates are just as rampant now in rural as they have been in urban. You know, there's other factors that are coming in right now. So if you want to also ask some questions about the timeliness of some of these things and how these experts might weigh in on that as well. Feel free to put anything in the chat, or else you can just unmute yourself and ask. You could do that too.
Hello, this is Wendell from Colorado. And I also serve as a governor's appointee on the State Economic Development Commission. And I think two additional things beyond what Chantal mentioned are happening in Colorado. Number one is the governor has created this rural cabinet, which is another add-on to what we were already focused on in terms of rural areas. I think the other partnership we have is with the private sector, which has been instrumental in raising funding for businesses. So I think in local government, to expand the capacity, you also need to be really forward-thinking in selecting partners, especially from the private sector. I think we've done a good job with that.
Yeah, Wendell, can you talk a little bit about opportunity zones? I think that might be an interesting piece for those across the country.
Sure, I think we were one of the few states in the country that the former executive director of the Office of Economic Development specifically targeted rural areas. So in Colorado, over 60% of our designated opportunity zones are in rural areas, and that was very intentional by the former governor, and that it has in and of itself focused a lot of attention on rural areas and led to some funding of different projects. So I think that's another strategy that worked well.
And then there's also Rural Jumpstart, which is a really interesting incentive for rural employees.
Where they partner with higher education institutions and employers to develop the workforce. We also have another incentive we've enacted to encourage businesses, especially tech companies that are locating along the Front Range and in urban areas, to actually locate in rural areas. So we provide an incentive for Front Range or urban or metropolitan area businesses to actually locate some of their employees in rural areas. And the state provides technical assistance and support and referrals, and that's also starting to take shape, especially with a lot of remote workers wanting to flee the major metropolitan areas, from both coasts. And then when they get into Colorado, or if they're in Denver in the metropolitan area, they do want to get to the mountains. So we've got to absorb and prepare for that workforce. With broadband, of course.
Yeah. Thanks for adding to the conversation.
Anyone else? I think any other questions that you have, the contact information through Global Minded for Chantal, myself, Lauren, and we would be glad to, I regret we could not all be in person to chat. This is as good as it gets, and it was really good. But would love to continue the conversations with anyone. Carol, do you want to wrap up? Or?
Sure. Thank you. Well, thank you very much to Lauren and Chantal, and also for all of you for making time for this really important topic, and JC for your planning all week. I do want to just give you a brief glimpse into a couple of the things happening later this week. Tomorrow is Rural Innovations in Education during COVID and beyond. Number of different very interesting people, sponsored by the Nathan Yip Foundation. And then Wednesday is Economic Development and Related Socioeconomic Considerations in Rural America. And then we have Ron Lazard from the White House on Thursday, Fortifying Native Students, Faculty, and Communities during and after COVID-19. Great lineup there. And then JC's panel on Friday, which is called Native American Business Opportunities, Tribal Economic Development, and Post-Secondary Education and Workforce Participation. So if any of you are able to join us, we would love to have you there or share it out with your rural networks. And then all of these will be recorded and will be posted within 24 hours to our YouTube channel. So you can also share links later. And then we also have all the sign up and everything in our newsletter. So we hope we are seeing everybody in person in Denver, all of us vaccinated next June, and really appreciate your making a priority of these rural issues and the really critical population that rural America represents for our diverse talent pipeline. So thanks to all of you, and we hope to be able to see you tomorrow or sometime later this week. And thanks again to Lauren, Chantal, and JC for setting this up.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.